This week in ABC, Dan Schleter will be covering Daniel chapter 2, which is the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of this statue that's made of all sorts of different elements. The head is gold, and the neck is silver, and the torso is bronze, and then it's iron legs and iron and clay feet. And Daniel is brought in to interpret this dream. And it ends up being a really profound message that kind of echoes throughout the rest of the story of Daniel, the entire book. It's not so much about trying to pinpoint the symbolism of all these different elements within the statue, although that's really interesting. And so, for instance, when you read about this dream and you read about this rock that's cleft from the mountain, not by any human hands, and it crushes the statue, what scholars typically try to do is to pinpoint exactly what each of the elements of the statue refers to. So, for instance, Daniel does the interpreting of the head. The golden head is, of course, Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar's empire. And from there, they move down, and the silver becomes Persia or the Median Persian Empire. And after that, you've got the Greeks, for instance, and Alexander the Great, who conquered much of the known world at that time. And after Alexander, you've got the Romans. And so they try to historically pinpoint who this is referring to. And that's really interesting, and it's worth discussion. But most importantly, the profound point that sticks out to me when you read Daniel 2 is what this says about God's sovereignty, specifically God's sovereignty over all of human history, that we have this tendency of thinking of empires and kings as driving history, but underneath it all, Yahweh is directing and orienting history towards the culmination of all history, which is through his son, Jesus Christ, in the kingdom that he establishes, not by human hands, but by accomplishing the will of his Father. And so it makes you think of an interaction later on that happens in Matthew's gospel when Jesus enters into Jerusalem. He has been talking about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven is how Matthew puts it, all throughout Matthew's gospel. And then he has this interaction with the Pharisees when he enters into the parable of the tenants. At the close of the parable of the tenants, he has this conversation, and he says to him in Matthew 21, verse 42, "Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." So you hear in there some echoing of Daniel 2, right, with "this was the Lord's doing, not done by human hands." Of course, he's specifically quoting a psalm here, but then it moves into this statement, and I think this kind of profoundly captures, and Jesus is alluding to Daniel 2 when he says these words. He says, "Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone," just like the stone in Daniel 2 that was cleft from the mountain, "will be broken to pieces. And when it falls on anyone, it will likmao in Greek. It will crush them or reduce them to dust." It's this note of utter judgment. And if you go back and you read Daniel chapter 2, the Hebrew word, the root for that, is the same conceptual idea. It's the same linguistic idea. It's this notion of utter and complete judgment that God is rendering on all the kingdoms of the earth as he is accomplishing the work of salvation through his heavenly kingdom. And so Jesus here is making a profound connection to Daniel 2 and signifying that he is the fulfillment of this prophecy. This kingdom that he's ushered in is the fulfillment of that prophecy. And we see Jesus reference Daniel in other parts of his ministry when he refers to himself as the Son of Man. And so reading the book of Daniel from this point, we saw it a little bit in Daniel 1 with this conflict between the Babylonian pantheon and Yahweh, and the supremacy of Yahweh over even the gods of Babylon, in spite of what the current circumstances for Daniel and his companions look like. Here we see that fleshed out even further, that no matter what happens in this book or what happens throughout the course of history moving forward, what we can know with certainty from this dream and the interpretation of this dream is that God is orchestrating and moving and working throughout all time, space, and history, and that his will be done, and that his kingdom is forever. Unlike the kingdoms of the earth that rise and fall continually, God's kingdom and God's plan is forever, and it's because of the work of Jesus Christ. And so I hope that's an encouragement to you in a world that's filled with all sorts of political affairs, warfare, of distress, of uncertainty in our politics. I hope that's a reminder to you about the nature of God's kingdom and why that's good news for you. And I hope you'll continue to join us as we make our way through the book of Daniel and learn more about this really fascinating work of apocalyptic literature. God bless you.